King Kong Bundy has passed away. It was reported late Monday night by Bundy's longtime friend David Harrow, who reported Bundy's death on his Facebook page. And we don't necessarily know all the details surrounding his death, but it was known that he was in poor health for the last quite a while, last few months. So, and him, when you look at him, he's a big guy. Obviously, 6'4". He was over 400 pounds during his wrestling career. Probably not that much anymore, but he was such a large man. And you know, we saw this happen to Vader. A lot of these bigger guys, when you get into your late 60s, the health problems from being that big, obviously, come back. And with Bundy, I don't remember him being too much in the public eye the last few years as much as he once was, because when you look at King Kong Bundy in the 80s, he was very popular. If you don't remember how much of an influence King Kong Bundy had, look at Married with Children, which was one of the most famous sitcoms of all time. The last name Bundy, which is all the characters have that last name, that's the main family, that's their last name, came from one of the creators who was a huge fan of wrestling, and his favorite wrestler was King Kong Bundy. So just as almost a tribute to him, that's how they got the last name Bundy. And he even made a couple guest appearances on the show in which he came off very likable. And that was quite the contrast, because at the time I think he made the appearances, he wasn't in the WWF. I think he had left at that time. And he showed a lot more personality and a lot more humor. And during the WWF, he was really built well as like this monster villain. He was a great monster villain. He was an animal. They had him at the first WrestleMania in the second match. He absolutely crushes Special Delivery Jones. Just demolishes him, and from 85 to 86 he was built as a monster. It had him go through guys. He destroyed people at Saturday night's main event, and from that time it was clear, especially when you look at that format, how they built up stars even to this day. They were clearly building him up for Hulk Hogan. That was their plan. They had him eventually in 85 he was traded to Bobby Heenan from I think they had like Heenan and Jimmy Hart, whatever. They would trade wrestlers, and he became part of the Heenan family. And Heenan and him were the great foil to Hogan at WrestleMania 2. That was their main event. They had him destroy Hulk Hogan. There was a famous angle during Saturday night's main event in which they had Hogan in the corner, and Bundy just runs into him, giving like 3 major splashes in the corner, crushes the guy's ribs, and that was the major heat angle. But before that, and before we get to WrestleMania 2, they had him feud with Andre the Giant, and that was built as a major program. And at the time, it was a situation where neither guy could really lose, so they'd always end in disqualifications. They'd have stuff like Big John Studd interfering, who's another wrestler who passed away. He was a big guy, too. And they never really had him get a big win over Andre, but eventually when you get to WrestleMania 2, it's the main event. It's a steel cage match. It's him and Hulk Hogan for the WWF Championship. And when you look at that match, it was not a good match at all, but at the same time, it was a huge accomplishment. Being the main event of the second WrestleMania is a big deal. That show was basically a 3-part show. The New York part, a Chicago part, and an LA part. The New York show was the big attraction was Roddy Piper and Mr. T. The Chicago show, the big attraction, I think, was a WWF NFL Battle Royal. And you had a lot of Chicago Bears in that Battle Royal. And then the Los Angeles attraction was Hogan's big match with Bundy in the cage. And from then, he had various feuds. He feuded with several different wrestlers until he got his next WrestleMania match was against Hillbilly Jim, and this wasn't just a singles match, it was a 6-man tag in which they had midgets in the match. And there's always a big rib on Bundy, was he went from main event from 2 to the next series in a match with midgets against Hillbilly Jim. And that match ended with, I think Bundy just slammed one of the midgets and got himself disqualified. Yeah, it was horrible. They did a lot of that goofy stuff in the 80s. And then eventually he lost to Ultimate Warrior, I think it was. I think they had him feud with the Warrior for a bit, and eventually he left the company. He was semi-retired. He did a lot of acting. I think his main goal was to get into acting after leaving with the WWF. He made several appearances. He did a lot of He had a stand-up comedy career. He has done several acting gigs. I think he even appeared in shows such as Weird Science. He appeared on Golden Goal. So he had a career outside of wrestling, and that was basically where I think he was heading to go. And from that time to 88 to 94, he wrestled in ECW, wrestled at the November to Remember pay-per-view, but the majority of the time he was in and out of wrestling. He was never full-time. He eventually came back and as the part of Ted DiBiase's stable in 1994, and he made his return. He was there for a year, and his WrestleMania match that year is when he wrestled The Undertaker at WrestleMania 11 in a match I don't think many people are very fond of. It was a horrible match, to be honest. It was Undertaker was one of his worst WrestleMania matches, probably the worst WrestleMania. And when you go back at that period, that was really some of the worst things in the WWF 95. And Bundy was pushed, but it was just that $1 million stable. It just never was, the Heenan family. It never was anything like that, or even stuff with Jimmy Hart. I just thought the stuff at DiBiase with the factions, I was just never a big fan. And I think that was really the company at the time was just not doing well. And eventually he leaves once again. He left the WWF in 95. And he would basically be one of those guys who was a wrestler who would do independent shows. He would wrestle at independent shows, and most of the time it wasn't really wrestling. It was mainly just doing doing autograph sessions and stuff like that. Now, he was part of a lawsuit against the WWF, and this happened when he claimed long-term neurological injuries. So it'll be interesting to see how the company put some more into him. I'm sure they'll do a graphic. It's going to know if they'll do a tribute because he deserves it. He was a big star. We'll see how they tribute to him. But with Bundy, well, actually, I shouldn't call him Bundy. I'll call him, Christopher Pallies, his real name. He was definitely a huge star in the 80s. There's no denying that, even though he had the lawsuit against him. So I assume they'll still do a tribute to him. That lawsuit, by the way, was dismissed in September of 2018. So when you look back at his career, I think he'll be known as one of that monster villain, big guy who faced Hulk Hogan. I think that'll be probably his legacy. I think most people think of Bundy, they'll probably think of the guy, destroying Hulk Hogan, running into his back, injuring his ribs, and he was a big star for the company. And I think the Married with Children thing definitely helped him in pop culture. I think that, if anything, also made him a pop culture star because I think a lot of people know the name Bundy from that show because that show was such a big hit in the 80s. And I still, whenever it's on, I enjoy Married with Children. So with that, another big name passes away, and unfortunately he was never in the Hall of Fame. They never inducted him to the WWE Hall of Fame, and he was definitely a Hall of Fame worthy candidate. Everyone who's I'm seeing so many tweets about King Kong Bundy right now, so many people paying tribute. Hurricane Helms, Big E, Dave Meltzer, Rikishi, a lot of people really memorable thinking of him. Mick Foley wrote a really nice thing about King Kong Bundy, Chris Pallies. He told him how cool he was to him in the 80s when Foley was a nobody in the locker room. Wrote something, Brutus Beefcake. They were actually good friends. So you see a lot of wrestlers paying tribute to Bundy. And this is still, breaking really quickly. So Rusev, I saw something too there. A lot more wrestlers will hear about this morning. So another very unfortunate death in the wrestling world. Unfortunate he never was inducted to the WWE Hall of Fame, and it's one of those situations where they're going to induct guys, but they're not going to induct. They're only going to induct one wrestler who's passed away. probably only one deceased wrestler a year, so it'll be a while before we see Bundy in the Hall of Fame. I think they're going to induct Vader to Jim Nider, who passed away recently, so it's going to be interesting to see when they induct him, but I think he'll get in eventually, and he definitely deserves it. So, sad loss, rest in peace. Chris Pallies will be remembered as the great King Kong Bundy.